Hey guys, thank you for tuning in to another episode of InRange. This is going to be an Old West vignette. You know, one of the questions I get on my Old West vignettes quite frequently is, when did the Old West end? However, I think there's a definitive period in which you can see the Old West transfer and change into something else. And where I'm at today actually personifies that in many ways. I'm in the ghost town of Gleeson, Arizona. Gleeson sprung out in the year 1900, pretty much after the decline of Tombstone. It was a copper mining community that had about 1,500 people in it. And so what you see is from the 1900s up into World War I, technology and lifestyles changing dramatically. Things like the advent of electrical power being provided to some of the community, although not so much out here. Obviously the change of technology in terms of cars versus horses, gun technology, etc. So I'm really out right now on the main street. This is High Lonesome Road, and this is where the main street of Gleeson was. And right now, you wouldn't know it by looking at it. But there's a couple buildings here that are pertinent to our story right now. Behind me, and to my right, or your left on the camera, is the Joe Bono Saloon and store. There was a store attached to this as well. This was the epicenter of the town. The miners on the weekends would come here to get their rest, relaxation, and fun on. And then right to my left, or your right on the camera, is the 1910 jail, which was also pertinent because the miners that had a little too much fun here landed up over there. But also, the Sheriff Wheeler, who actually maintained this town and law and order in this area, had some interesting interactions with not only the locals, but with New Mexico and Mexico based on prohibition. Not only federal prohibition, but before that, state prohibition. We're going to get to that in a moment. In the distance there, you can see the actual proper jail built in 1910. However, previous to that jail built in 1910, between 1900 and 1910, there was this. The jail tree. Quite literally. In fact, the cable's still here. So this cable, which you're seeing here on the ground, was tied to this gigantic old oak tree, and it is actually now embedded in the oak tree itself. And this cable was used to string up as many prisoners as necessary, chained to it right here in the wash. In fact, you can see the cable is actually now part of the tree. Now, the cable's broken at one point or another. That happens over 100-something plus years. But before that jail was built in 1910, this was the original jail itself. So imagine here, this tree, bunch of prisoners chained to this chain right here, or this cable, out into the wash. And the question was asked at one point, what happens when the wash starts running? And the answer was, well, sometimes it takes care of the problem. Well, as I said previously, the original jail was actually just a cable tied around a tree, which I showed you just a moment ago. After that, they realized they needed a little bit better jail, so they actually built a wooden structure with a tin roof. However, that wasn't all that great because the tin roof could be pushed off and, well, prisoners could escape. So, 1910, you see this structure behind me gets built. This is concrete, iron, exactly what you think of as a jail. This was a ruin from the 1950-somethings on until 2008, when it was lovingly restored by a local who has deep roots into this community. Actually owns the Bono Saloon that we talked about in the video as well. So this now looks like it did in the day, and this is where Wheeler plied his trade as a sheriff, and there's some very interesting artifacts and stuff that I want to show you inside. We're also giving you a taste of what a real old frontier era turning into the new era jail looks like. So take a look. So this was the original entrance. This is where the actual sheriff's office would have been. And as you can see, they've turned this into a full-fledged museum filled with all sorts of very cool artifacts. High Lonesome Road. Sheriff would be here, guarding his prisoners with his trusty rifle and shotgun rack there on the wall. And then here we go to where the bad people landed up. Also just partially a museum. However, this gives you an idea. So they would have more than one prisoner in here at a time, no doubt about that. This is certainly not only for one person. And if you're interested what happened if a person needed to use the restroom, well, that was rather not very public. Right around the corner, there's actually a hole in the ground right there that's been boarded up, but this was the restroom. Now, this window, of course, was here. There was an opening here, but it had grates on it, so they've now put a regular window in for the purposes of visitors, but that would have been completely ironed up with big iron bars. But this is actually quite nice. Compared to being chained to a tree, I think I would prefer this, no doubt about it, but certainly not a place that you'd want to be. And by the way, this tile on the floor is not original. This was added in later. This was just a concrete floor. Sheriff Wheeler would be here in his office, and hear about things, for example, like, I don't know, potentially people bootlegging alcohol from the wet state of New Mexico into the state of Arizona, and he would go apprehend them, or at least try. This jail is particularly interesting because it's got 2 stories tied to early Prohibition that are very indicative of things to come. And as we all know, when you restrict something, all you do is actually create a black market. It's funny, in places like Arizona, when you see a prop like this, you'd expect this to be a fake rifle, but nope, it's a legitimate 30-30, just sitting here for people to look at. The real deal. Ah, Arizona. There may be other problems for getting away, such as this leg weight. They would chain this to your leg, and even if you were to break free, trying to get away running with this on your leg would be a problem, no doubt about it. Turn of the century, telephones started becoming a real thing. Telegraphs out here to the sheriff here from Tombstone or down to John Slaughter's ranch southeast of here were a reality. And so the ability to have high-speed communication made being a quote-unquote outlaw a much more challenging thing than it was in the days of the past. Here we have handcuffs, or at least early handcuffs. These are what they were like in the day. See, pretty simplistic system, but if you're locked into them, doesn't really matter, does it? Old-time keys look quite a bit different than they do from the day. These are original to the location, by the way. So these ones are, at least. These were original jail keys. Goes to show you how simple they really were. But still, something to keep you locked up. So this was quite a nice jail for its day. In fact, it even had a private restroom. There's your toilet paper, there's a seat, and there is a hole in the ground right there that's been covered by that can for, well, obvious reasons. But this would have been the sheriff's restroom. And the prisoner had one just like it, or I should say prisoners, on the other side. So you could turn this corner, and at least you'd have a little bit of privacy, and you didn't have to go outside to do your thing. Right behind me are the arches of what was the schoolhouse. Now, there used to be an arch on top of that, but apparently vandals destroyed that, I think, in the early 1980s. Some of the arches laying there in the ruins. This was actually a single-story schoolhouse, but it was very improved for the area. Lots of schools, a lot of kids went here for school in the day. It looks like it's 2-story, but it's not. It did have a basement for storage and stuff like that, but I'm going to splice in some photos of what it looked like back then versus what it looks like right now, and it kind of gives you a little bit of context about how things can change in a very short duration of time. 1930s, there was kids here going to school, men mining the mines, people shopping at the Bono Saloon, and now it doesn't quite look like that anymore. So it's nice to look at things like this and just think about where we are in our lives and where things might be just 100 years from now and how different things can really be in such a short duration of time. So imagine kids running up here, going up these stairs to go to school, and then of course this down here is the basement, but this would have been a floor right here, probably wooden, and these were school storage areas, and school was right here. Kind of amazing, really. Big part of the arch is down here. Well, yeah, part of it is, but it's pretty much gone. Kids would come out of school, and what did they see? The jailhouse. So I'm at the ruins of the hospital here in Gleeson, and this hole is not something you would expect it to be. Turns out this was where they would cremate remains. So for example, someone got maimed in the mine, lost a leg or an arm or something, or a hand. Well, in the Old West, or even in the New West, guess what you did with it? You brought it back here. This was essentially an ersatz crematorium just out back from the hospital itself, which is now really nothing more than a ruin. This was the hospital. We're getting privileged access today. The guy that owns this property is here with us, and he's giving us a tour and telling us stuff that you would not normally hear otherwise. So here's the hospital. Bad things happened at the mines. Up there, guys would land up down here. Fortunately, frequently things like crush damage, losing a leg or an arm, like I said, was a reality working in these old mines. And, well, they would cut them off because there was nothing better to do. Throw them in that hole and incinerate them. So what we are at here is actually part of the mining district. This is the powder room or the magazine room. So this is where the dynamite would be kept. So one of the first things they needed to do is they actually blew this area out, and this went down underneath in a subterranean area away from where any people would be. And this is where they would store the dynamite, left and right. And the reason for this is that stuff was pretty sensitive. It was nitroglycerin based. And so if it were to detonate by accident, it would channelize the blast here and out, hopefully when no one was here, but nowhere anything where anyone could be that would be harmed or otherwise. So I'm going to take you on a little tour on this real quickly. So as you can see, we're walking here. There's actually some old wood from that time. This is one of the original doors. This is probably collapsed at one point. I'm sure that this was rock here, but it's no longer. But you can see the door, and they would have kept it locked, of course. And then as you walk in here, you can't see it so much, but this goes down and it turns right and it turns left, and the dynamite would be kept in these locations. If it were to detonate, hopefully it would contain within here. If it blasted out this way, hopefully very few people would be harmed. But this was away from the community, away from the miners in general, and this is where they stored that stuff. Kind of like you do today with anything else that was potentially hazardous. So what you're looking at right here is where they would process the ore. So we're down away from the mine, a little bit south of the mine actually, and these are different steps. Now you're not going to see this anymore, but there would have been big structures here where they did the milling operations, where they would crush the ore, smelt it into essentially molten slag, and then extract the copper from that, put the copper into ingots, and then ship that off. And then the rest of that, which was no longer useful, is just called slag, and they would dump it over the side of the hill into these little egg shapes, which I'm going to show in a picture right here. But here's some what's left of the actual milling and processing operation, and this is done at different levels because the ore would drop down via gravity to different processing ports. This would have been the last phase of this, and you can see there's a lot of weird colored earth here which came from the mine, and then when they were done with it, the slag heap would just get dumped over the side right over this way. So it's a little hard to see in the darkness here, but this is a giant gear, and there'd be cables on this attached to a steam engine, and these cables would run here up onto this gigantic A-frame and over the top where there's a wheel up there, and that wheel would attach to an elevator, and that elevator would actually lower things in and out of the actual adit itself, which is right here. Now the A-frame had to get moved back. It used to be right on top of this gigantic pit, but it was moved back because once the mine shut down, people were using this for inappropriate recreational activities, and they were tying ropes onto this A-frame and then lowering themselves down into this this adit into the mine. So not a good idea. People got stuck down here and they had to get support and help frequently, so this A-frame was pulled away from this mine entrance. But anyways, the cables went up to the A-frame, would lower miners up and down with whistle blows. Whistle blows would indicate up, down, and other situations. And then ore would also come up out of this, and then they would take the ore over this way and up this, which would be a conveyor belt of sorts, into this dump shaft, which would then dump the ore down into this cylinder, hopper, probably a better term, and then you can see there's a slide there, and that ore that came out of the mine would then go into cars, which are on a rail. The railroad is no longer there. Those rail tracks are long since removed, but that rail would then take those carts over this way and over to the milling operation. So guys, I just wanted to give you something here that you never get the privileged access to. We actually got to go into what is left of the Joe Bono Saloon. This was ran as a saloon up until the 80s, but this goes way back into the origins of Gleeson as a town, and those were the doors. They were kicked over by someone at some point. This roof only collapsed in the last couple of years or so, so this building is not long to live, but you're going to see the inside of this. This mural was painted in the early 1980s by a traveler, and they were having parties here and enjoying themselves, I mean, gosh, from 1900 up until the 1980s. So I know this just looks like a ruin, which at this point it is, but you're going to see right now, this is the inside of a building that is soon to no longer be with us. So hopefully we can preserve this little bit of video forever, and we'll know what it was like to be, at least partially, like inside the Joe Bono Saloon. So we talk about how much things change in the Old West versus the New West, but here's an example of where things don't change at all. Sheriff Wheeler would get the illicit, prohibited booze off of smugglers and then promptly sell it to Joe Bono right here, and he would then sell it to his customers, and he would store it down here in this basement. So, you know, turns out who you knew and what you could pay really dictated what you could do with your lifestyle and history. So just like now, just like then. So when people say, is the Old West all that different than the New West? And the answer is nope. Not at all. So guys, I hope you appreciate this tour of what really a mining camp was like, you know, from the turn of the century up until the 1960s. This really gives you an idea of how the Old West turned into the New West, not only in terms of how people lived and gave you a tour of what the mines really were and how people lived in a community like this, but the kind of stuff that, for example, Sheriff Wheeler had to deal with the Prohibition era and the things going on with state prohibition turning into federal prohibition. And then, of course, men being men and people being people, doing things like confiscating the goods and then selling it to his buddy who then sold it to the miners because, hey, that's how actually things really work in real life. So if you like this kind of stuff, guys, please consider supporting us on Patreon. We're a fully viewer-supported project. We take no monetization from YouTube at all. And please, also, if you really like this stuff, above and beyond that, subscribe to the channel and share this video with your friends, whether it's Facebook, YouTube, or Full30. We can't depend on the algorithms. Thanks for tuning in to another Old West Vignettes. We'll see you next time.